Hey, this is David Drury, and you're listening to Not That Kind of Christian. This is where we take on tough topics with heart, humor, and hope. And we try to make sense of faith in everyday life, stuff you're probably looking at in your life. Today, we're reflecting on culture and Christianity. I've noticed many today put culture and Christianity kind of at war with one another, or they might just dismiss culture as a non-issue. But my guest today is not that kind of Christian. That's Yamil Acevedo. He's someone who brings both personal and practical things to conversations that often get stuck on the surface about culture. And he spent a lot of time helping people see how faith, family, and culture fit together without losing each of those in the process. So Yamil is the executive vice president of Wesley Seminary and the author of Faithful Inheritances. So welcome to the pod, Yamil. Glad to have you here.
Hey, I'm glad to be here, David. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, we're going to talk about something Jamil's done some extensive thinking on, and he helps us see how the stories we inherit shape the way we see the world. This is really true for everyone. Culture is not just about certain kinds of people. It's all of us. So we're going to talk about culture. And my first question is around the fact that you've written and talked about inheritance. That's such a key word here. So I ask you, Yamil, what's something you've inherited from your own faith or community that keeps your faith grounded? I'm kind of curious your personal reason for focusing in on that word inheritance.
Yes. Yeah, that's an insightful question, David. Thank you. Um, Inheritance, there's so much to unpack there. And I perhaps was too ambitious in choosing that word. The theological leanings and understandings from the Old Testament, the New Testament, the land, the mission, the entrusted with the news, but from a more sociological and more of a personal, perhaps, perspective, things that I started to notice that I inherited. Um, Curiously enough, it wasn't until I moved from Puerto Rico to Carmel, Indiana, to the Midwest. Because back there, it's just um, everything you take everything for granted. You're not thinking about these differences because they don't contrast with your surroundings. So when things start to contrast with your surroundings, they emerge, and all of a sudden they emerge in different ways, unexpected, and in in circles of friends and family or church, and you see people turning their heads like, "Wait, what was that?" Or and okay, what did I just say? So some of the things that I will start to point out again, when we moved to the Midwest was 10 years ago in 2015, and so it's been 10 years of enjoying this Midwest politeness, and and exchanging the beautiful crystal clear waters of the Caribbean, fields and fields of corn. But one of the first things is like the hospitality. For example, um, we connected with the church at the very beginning. That was part of the denomination that I was part of. I was ordained. I was a lead pastor back in Puerto Rico. So moved here, connected with the church, and trying to create bonds and relationships and friends. And they didn't know what to do with me. They didn't know exactly, what does he want, and um, or what's his ministry. So I quickly realized that there were certain categories and certain even expectations or ascribed expectations that I was completely unaware of. And while I was, like I said, hospitality, while I was trying just to be very, myself and my family, and my wife and I, inviting people home, um, cooking a meal, for coffee. We just met maybe 10, 15 minutes or 30 minutes or for one or a couple of times. And we're already inviting you home, um, and realized that was not reciprocated.
Mm.
And again, when things start to contrast with your beliefs, behaviors, and actions, you realize that, okay, that's something. So for, I would say, for a pretty, long time, maybe 2, 3 years, I felt like I was kinda angry.
Mm,
'Cause I'm
mm,
like,
yeah.
okay, I'm walking my dog, saying hi to everyone on the street. Everyone is being very polite, but it's a porch politeness. It was not like the type of hospitality that we were used to. Like, hey, let's grab coffee, come to my house, and let's just just start to get acquainted. So that's something that I realized that okay, it is not the same everywhere
Mm.
around the world, right?
Yeah, we all
Um,
have our different kind of ways we do that. Hospitality is such a big one too, because it's like
yeah.
about our homes and about how we build relationships and all that. And so, like, as you talk to people about these culture and faith and your identity and these kind of some of that's a little like you're talking about practices we have. When you
Mhm,
talk to people about that, what surprises people most when it comes to that discussion? What's something that people might have an aha moment, or maybe you had that you'd
mhm.
love other people to have?
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So it usually goes like this. Um, when they start to feel more, comfortable in asking questions,
Right.
um, it's because I intentionally try to create a space that they feel it's a safe space. If not, people shy away from questions, so they will say like, "Hey, where you from?" Or "Do I pick an accent?" Or that's still superficial, right? That's an introduction. But when they start to ask, meaningful questions, um, sometimes again they come in unexpected ways. So when I share with friends or pastors, or when I'm invited to speak about this topic, I challenge people to think about their own cultural backgrounds. What was something that you enjoy doing while you were growing up, or your upbringings, or that you transfer to your kids. Um, and I ask people to share some of those examples and experiences, and then I wait and I share about mine, right? And I share about mine, and
Yeah.
they're like, there's a different type of aha because there's an aha that crosses cultural context and barriers, and that's the aha that I experience when I share some of my experiences. Like for example, I can share about, well, when I was growing up, we went during Christmas. It was a big time. It was a beautiful time. It was family time. Lots of food. But then I remember that on January the 5th, so on January 6th, we celebrate the Three Kings Day. That's what they call it, the Magi or
Yeah.
the Epiphany. Um, but we call it the Los Tres Reyes Magos or Los Santos Reyes. So I remember I was a kid, and they were putting me to bed. My parents were putting me to bed, and I'm like, "We don't have grass for the camels." And and they were like, "Oh yeah, we've been doing this for years." And I'm like, "We gotta get grass for the camels." And yeah, they followed through, and I still got my PJs on. We went to a park nearby, and there I am, just getting grass, putting the grass on a shoebox, and coming back because I believe that that it was it was just part of this cultural and this religious celebration that I
Yeah.
enjoyed so much as a kid. So it started to blend. So when I share about the blends of religion with culture, that's an aha moment for people.
Yeah, yeah, and we all have that, and it's so funny, we in some ways can see other people's culture more than our own in a way,
Hmm.
and it's when you live in another culture, even people that might visit, you notice those things in another culture. Certainly when you immigrate to another culture, or move even within a country to a place that's so different culturally that it shocks you. Even, I mean, America is diverse enough that there's different places that have different
Hmm.
culture, and other places that are more dominated by other cultural type things. So, it is interesting. You talked about that story of not the non-reciprocal, uh, having people over and then them not having you over. And I mean, two things that makes me think of in my own experience was we've had that a lot. My wife and I, tended to be very hospitable, especially when we had younger kids in the house. We'd a lot of times have other families in. And we noticed what you're talking about as just a general thing in our own culture over time. The other thing we noticed is when we would have immigrants over, which we've had a lot of, we've done a lot of works with immigrants, my wife in particular. It's her full-time job now. But we noticed they were far more likely to have us over
Uh-huh.
and reciprocate like you're talking about, which was more likely than not in those cultures expected. And the here maybe an expectation is, hey, if you pick up the tab at a restaurant, I might pick it up next time. That might be our
Right.
our equivalent of reciprocation. And the other statistics I learned, my wife brings up to me from time to time, is that only 1 out of 10 immigrants in the United States have ever eaten a meal in an American's home. So I think that that's an
Yeah.
interesting thing. So some of this is noticing culture difference, and some is like saying, okay, maybe I can learn something from another culture. So how do you think, a lot of us feel a tension when it comes to culture and Christianity. How do we honor both our culture and our Christianity faithfully so that we don't lose either?
Right, right. Yeah, such a good question. Um, and people ask this question a lot, and I perceive um that when their context is perhaps not as diverse as others, as perhaps my context or your context, there's a level of shame or embarrassment. There's a level of oh, I mean,
Hmm.
um, am I not living at the stature at the stature? I mean, I'm not living at the level. I'm not living at the height of what I'm expected to live as a Christian, or am I doing something wrong, right? And so that's something that I need to navigate too with people, because yeah, we need to release them from that type of shame or embarrassment, or
Mm.
well,
Yeah,
because the
shame
context.
doesn't motivate very well. Shame
Right, right,
paralyzes.
right,
So
and it
yeah,
will
good
only
point.
create more, more isolation, or will turn like maybe shy, or it would become an obstacle or an impediment. Yeah, yeah. To your question of how do we navigate our faith in our culture, right? It has to do, of course, like I said, with context first, understanding the context, and continue growing in the understanding of our involuntary biases toward people. So for example, um, I quickly learned that I was not Puerto Rican in the U.S. I quickly learned that I was not Puerto Rican because, yeah, I think some people know, or but it's not only that they don't know how to localize me, but they actually only have one category. I'm generalizing here. One category is like you're Latino, Hispanic, and that's a big category, right?
Yeah.
Um, so um, so I started to lose my or struggle, not lose. I started to struggle with my Puerto Ricanness. Okay, I'm Puerto Rican. I don't eat spicy food. I mean, I like spicy, but I don't eat spicy food, right? And we like rice and beans, but our beans are completely different than the canned beans. I mean, I'm completely different than refrito and all of that, right? And so I started, but those are the marginal. It's part of a culture and tradition. But then when it came to faith, um, our kids say, and I say this to my parents and to my grandparents and even to my uncles. I ask them for the blessing. So we say, I mean, every time I call them, I try to call my folks on Tuesdays during my commute from home to work, um, and it's the opening lines. It's like, "Hey guys, how you doing? Bendición." And it's me asking for your blessing. And their response is, Dios te bendiga, hijo. God bless you, son. God bless you, son. Right. So, but I
Beautiful.
do this with my parents they're Protestant, they're Christians, evangelicals. But I also do this with my Catholic family and members, and my grandmother, both of my grandmothers and grandparents were Catholic. So it doesn't matter. There's some religious background or foundation there. They're asking for a blessing, for God's blessing, but it's out of respect also. So there's a blend of that cultural foundation through we need to go back in history through colonization and Spain colonizing, and then all of the influence of when the U.S. came to Puerto Rico, but I think it was 1898, 1897, something like that. um, and the influence of them, Protestantism in Puerto Rico. But there were already so many Roman Catholic formation and foundations there, right? That it's part of what we do. So me asking for bendición is something that I pass along, and my kids, I've inherited it. My kids have inherited it, right? And they asked me for bendición as well, so I blessed them, right? Now they are second gen. I don't know what's gonna go. How is that gonna go when they get married and they continue to get more immersed in the American culture. So again, that's an example. The context is different. Don't be ashamed of your context. Continue to learn and grow on what does it mean. What are your involuntary biases? Get acquainted with others, and expect some blends and merges that
Yeah,
that may be surprising to you, but they're just very normalized, very common, for others like me,
for sure.
as a Puerto Rican in the States. That's not something that I see other, maybe some other countries, Latin American countries, they do it, but I don't see very often here in the US among other Hispanic or Latinos. So that's an example of how to I share about the blends of faith and culture. And what does that mean then? Does that mean that I mean, am I more Christian or less Christian? Are other people more Christian or less Christian than that? It doesn't mean like that. It doesn't mean that. It's like, okay, let's try to find where has God already paved the way. I mean, there's a paving of God,
Yeah,
and woven through history, right? There's some paths from God, and so those are some things that we can
interesting.
rescue, and create interesting conversations.
Right, and there's so many different. You're accentuating there, Jamil, the different cultures within something other perceive as a big old culture. Like, and some of the struggle there is that you talked about being Puerto Rican, but sort of having to meld into this bigger identity. And it's like your identity is actually not that thing, but it's kind of other people put it on you. And it's interesting because in America, that happens through just the idea of being white. And it's been fun for me because my wife comes from Holland, Michigan, where most everyone is Dutch when she grew up, and they have all these Dutch things. They have these parades, and my kids grew up wearing, these Dutch costumes and wooden shoes and all this stuff. And they celebrate Christmas on a different date, Sinterklaas, on the 5th of the December. And we've had fun kind of even recapturing some of that culture and celebrating it for
Yeah.
our kids. Like, our kids talk about it, even though I messed up the bloodline. I guess I'm no longer Dutch, or my kids are only half Dutch, so they're sort of not much. I don't know how you say that phrase, but we in a way do that in white culture. Is white culture itself, which really it's important to talk about the fact that I'm really from British people. That's my
Mhm.
primary inheritance, to use the language from your studies, is that. And that makes me part of who I am. And I need
Mhm.
to understand that and celebrate that and understand that. And whereas I think because a lot of Europeans sort of invented the idea of whiteness as a
Mhm.
continent, we've now done that to a continent and a half south of America. And we've done that in a way to all of Asia with 4 billion people,
Right.
which are the cultures are so diverse there. And we just sometimes think, no, you're just Asian. It's like, well, forget, no, I'm Indonesian or
Mhm.
Korean or Japanese, or
Mhm.
Malaysian or whatever. And we tend to lump people into these broad categories
Mhm.
instead. Well, I want to talk more about this. This is super interesting to me, but I want to take a moment and just mention one of our sponsors for this podcast, and that's Indiana Wesleyan University. IWU has this amazing way of combining faith and learning across everything from nursing to business to education and ministry training, like Jamil works with. If you're looking for a Christ-centered university that takes your calling seriously, wherever that leads, go go check out discover.endwest.edu. Again, that's discover.endwest.edu. Easy for me to talk about because I went to IWU back in the 1900s, as the kids like to say. And I stayed connected to IWU through the years. It's a wonderful place. And even one of my kids graduated from there. So I am now a papa of a graduate. So neat. So Jamil, let's talk more about this concept. You titled a book you wrote, Faithful Inheritances, and that dives into how faith shapes our cultural identity. But on a personal level, how has your story kind of shaped the way you see God at work in these different cultures that you're seeing and experiencing and living out?
Yes, absolutely. Um, so I started sharing part of my story when we moved, when we relocated.
Right.
Um,
From
and
the beautiful shores of Puerto Rico
from the
to, I think you
beautiful
said, the
shores,
corn fields of Indiana.
the
Yeah,
cornfields of
welcome.
India.
We do have
Yeah,
nice sunsets here, but
yeah,
there's
we do.
nothing to block the sunset.
Yeah, that's right, that's right. But you should see the sunset in the west, Puerto Rico. I mean, it's just, anyway.
Yes, I
Um,
have. Yeah.
um, so I started sharing a couple of things there. But I'll say to continue building on that, that the that what I started to notice, and once I started to realizing the differences, um, it was simultaneously I started working on my PhD and get acquainted with all of this sociological literature to answer some of the questions that I had about culture and about being immersed in a different cultural context. And I realized that there's a lot. I mean, there's a lot of good scholarship out there that has to do with being immersed in a culture as a minority and all of that. Um, but mainly for for first generation. So I'm considered first generation because I come
Yeah.
as an adult. Um, I mean, there are different tiers. There's like the one first generation, the 1.5, 1.75, there's the 2.0 generation, right? Um, but generally, if kids come, 7-year old or 8-year old, primary, years, they and they move to the States and they are, children of a first generation couple, or they are born in the States, they're the second generation um, um, couple. I mean, second generation kids growing here. I realized that my world and the way that I see it and what I receive as a scribe and what I'm also, ascribing to others was going to be completely different than the experience my kids will have as second generation Puerto Ricans in the US. I mean, it's a completely different experience. So for them, I'm relatively fluent and proficient in English because I went to a bilingual school since I was in third grade and all of that. And but they back in Puerto Rico, they went to a full English school, and now they're immersed in an English speaking world. Now the challenge is um, preserve your Spanish.
Yeah.
So it's switch, preserve your Spanish because language transfer culture.
Mm,
There's an inheritance that is passed through language, and it connects you with a group, and that's what I call in the book, and other scholars call it sense of belonging.
mm.
Your sense of belonging. So it is it is the same as well, not the same. I just not the same. It's not the right term. It is similar to um, um, I self-identifying with you self-identify with a group because of similar traits, similar traditions, or some other. But then I'm limited in what I can transfer to my kids so that they grow in their of belonging and understanding of their identity within this culture because I myself am disconnected and unplugged from all of my surroundings that all of the foundations. So, another way to see it is like, think about Israel, like, Israel had all of this social, religious, political, they're settling the land. And then, when they removed from the land, and they went to exile, some of the things that they had for granted that was part of their foundations were not there, and they needed to create, synagogues and groups and some other, things to preserve that. And there was a process of assimilation, acculturation, and different groups and factions worked differently and journey that,
Mm,
completely different. Nevertheless, it was formational for their growing and understanding of who they were as the people of God, right? So,
yeah,
they're being formed in their land because they have all of these structures. Outside, it's completely different, but they're still formed. So I'm here then trying to work on the formation of my kids and their sense of belonging, and growing in the understanding of who they are, and being challenged by the language, being challenged by by the food, being challenged by the traditions, the proximity to cousins, the proximity to to memes. I mean, it's a whole new world, right? So I am very found myself very limited, and sometimes certain restraints and constraints about helping their own formation, right?
for
So
sure.
one thing is how I'm formed, and the other is how my kids are formed and shaped through their Christianity, um, as as minorities immersed in in the U.S.
Yeah, so you talk about that second generation impact, and I've heard lots of who I've talked about it the most with is you know, different people from Latin America who have planted churches here in the States. So they're pastors who are thinking about their congregation, and they have many people who are first generation immigrants in their churches who would be primarily Spanish speaking church, and they sometimes bilingual, but often Spanish. And then they're talking about their kids, the second generation there, and this tension you're talking about. So for people that might be listening to this, they're thinking about their neighborhood, their community, maybe their place of work. They have interactions with people that have this second generation uh, tension going on, or in their church they have it where they're doing it. So, what would be your advice of things for us to think about, ways to approach that, so we can be of help to people and be good friends and neighbors and coworkers and fellow churchgoers with people who are uh, struggling with something there that, I mean, parenting's hard enough on its own,
Oh my gosh.
in your own culture, but for somebody raising their kids in a new culture, how can we be of help?
Hmm. Yes, so good, so good. Um, there's the family realm, the community, the church. I mean, there's so many, and something that I would like to. I mean, it's obvious, but still, I need to say it. Second generation, um, a second generation is a spectrum
Right.
of young,
It's not one kind. Yeah.
teenagers, adults, elder. I mean, it's they come in all sizes and shapes and ages. I mean,
Amen. Yeah.
it's yeah, we know this, but we tend to forget, about it, right? So when it comes up to raising, raising kids, we need as parents to grow in our understanding of where we are. We need to understand that, and we need to work as parents with our own involuntary biases and our own barriers and the things that we create, or we sometimes we demonize we demonize things,
Yeah.
or because it's the lenses that we have, right? So we need to take a step back and increase our maturity and our discernment, spiritual discernment, in learning more about, like, enjoying our understanding, learning more about where we are and why is it that that we're here and our surroundings, and and not be too quick to label, or to say good or bad, but just grow in understanding, seek understanding before trying to get understood. So as parents, there's a lot of work there. Two, um, as parents, we need to also understand that because our kids are growing immersed in a different culture, that's not inherently bad. There's nothing wrong with that. If we have trusted God and we trust God in the process, and He is in control and of our lives, this is great. This is going to be fine. I mean, there's nothing wrong with this. So in the same way that is formational for us is formational for them. So can we just co-labor with God in the formation of the
Mm.
character and identity of our kids here? And I really emphasize this because um, second generation, children will be able, and adults, and they are able to 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 connect and create bridges between cultures that no one else can.
Yeah,
They
they're kind
live
of
in this.
bicultural, they're not just bilingual usually, but
Mhm.
bicultural. They can code switch at the drop of a
Right,
hat.
right,
Yeah,
yes. Yeah, code switching and negotiating or
right.
strategizing
The
and
bridge is a
understanding.
great term you use, a bridge between.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. And so they're going to be able to do that, and we must see the work of God, and what God has planned through second generation. So that liminal state, that in betweenness, how many times we encounter God in the in between, right?
Yeah,
And so it's not hindered, right? They're actually it's an opportunity to grow their faith, right, even more. So yes, it's important so that they understand where they come from, but it's more important that they understand their destiny, where they're going, their future, what's ahead,
for
right?
sure.
So that's the second thing, that I will share with parents. Now, let's talk about churches. That one wrong. Let's talk about churches. Churches, in a similar way, we you need to know your congregants and your audience, pastors, Christian leaders, know them, and don't just go with the flow and say, hey, we are surrounded by growing population of Ethiopians or
Yeah.
Haitians or Latinos, so let's start a service in Creole or in French. Wait, what? You just just put yourself out there. This is the word that I use, and I may need to explain a little bit, but I use the word dislocate yourself. So
Mm,
the dislocation, and it's hard to dislocate ourselves when we are so comfortable where we are, right?
yeah.
But the experience of dislocation, um, I mean, it is again, it's transformational. So it is to give you an example, so sometimes we use the term like, "Hey, let's invite them to the table." Yeah, that's a good start, but that's not dislocation because it's my table. I mean,
Mm,
it's my table, my realm, my space, my conversation, and the hierarchy of power and the all of the
yeah.
dynamics play an effect. But if I'm the one knocking at the door, not someone else's, I am dislocating. So take that as a Christian leader, as a pastor, as an illustration, as an allegory. How how do you dislocate yourself? I mean, you move from your location into another space and just try to remove your lenses
Mhm.
and gain new lenses to learn terms, learn new vocabulary, behavior, and don't be afraid to ask questions. You may have a heart for seeing your church grow more multicultural, multi-ethnic, multi-generational, right? And that's something that God has planted, a seed that God has planted. But I'll say start by dislocation and asking questions unafraid to
That's
it's a
huge.
lifelong journey. I mean,
Yeah,
it is.
I felt exactly what you're talking about. I like the word dislocation in a way because it's the uncomfortable. I mean, if you dislocate your shoulder, it's
Yeah.
uncomfortable. So there is an uncomfortable component to it, but it like you say, it comes from a motivation of, hey, we want to welcome in, but sometimes you need to be welcomed in. And
Yes.
most immigrants have spaces they've created that still have their cultural imprint pretty dominantly, and to be in those spaces. So my wife and I have had some great experiences at doing that, not just to be in people's homes, which is a big part of that, like you said, knocking on their door and eating at their table, but also even some spaces they've created that are kind of events and communities to be able to do that whenever things are happening in our community. We try to just show up to those and be around it and learn from it. Like you said, ask questions and stuff. It's fun for us to just learn about those things. Even like we went to something that was almost all Indian people recently. I don't know anything about India much at all, other
Uh-huh.
than praying for some unreached people groups, and learned a lot of different things. So I think that's huge importance. I do want to pause before I ask a couple more questions of you, Jamil, to mention another one of our sponsors. And it makes sense now because you're talking about dislocation, and Global Partners is in the
Yeah.
dislocation business. Another one of our sponsors for this pod, and they really have a heartbeat for seeing the gospel reach every corner of the world. So they're looking for people to be able to send from everywhere to everywhere. They're not just sending missionaries, they're partnering with leaders around the globe to multiply disciples, start reproducible churches, and you can be involved in it either through praying or supporting a missionary, or maybe God's nudging your heart to the nations. You can go to gponline.org to find out more of how you can really start to see your space in that, and maybe God's going to dislocate you literally to another place. You never know. So you're talking about this moving target, Jamil, and some of how we can connect and little things we can do, ways to some of us just empathizing with the challenge. I know parents empathize with other parents. It's hard. In whatever age group your kids are in feels like the hardest age group until the next age group comes. And so we can empathize even with other people of the added challenge of the first and second generation thing. So let me flip it on the other way around. I wanted to start by talking about how we can help. But now what can we learn?
Mm.
What do you think the broader American church in particular can learn and should be learning from Latino Christianity, if I can use that broad of a term, or in your case, the Puerto Rican Christianity
Mhm.
you come from and are living out? What's
Mhm.
something we can learn or should be
Yes.
trying to learn?
Yes. I mean, absolutely. So many things, and so many nuances, depending on the cultural background, our country, foundation, first gen, second gen. There's so many things. I'll talk about um, some personal experiences and also some observations that emerged from my own research and are part of the book as well. So from my experience, one of them that I'll say is, I'll frame it this way: the other, we need to start seeing the other not as a missional object.
Mm,
Yeah. So 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 many conversations that I have with pastors and people, they're like, oh, they need to learn, they need to grow, they need to teach, right? And so I think that's something that we're we must learn together, is the other is not exclusively a missional object.
mm,
They are also co-laborers in the mission of God,
mm,
and they're co-laborer in God's kingdom, not necessarily or exclusively to their own groups,
mm,
but to the vast and to the whole family of God, and allowing ourselves to be molded, to be shaped, to be informed by that. That's a big win. That's a big win, because um, because when we put ourselves there to allow others to inform our own ways we live our Christianity and go our Christianity, we become stronger, deeper, not only interrelated, but stronger Christians and believers,
mm,
right? So let's go beyond the missional object, and I'll say, just to put an example, it's resilience, for example. When we talk about resilience, um, my experience of resilience, even so as a Puerto Rican, we're Americans, we're citizens. We don't go through the same issues and struggles that other brothers and sisters from Latin American countries go through. Right?
exactly.
I have no idea what a green card is. I have no idea what an H-1B is. I have no idea of some. I mean, no, There's never been a Puerto Rican passport. There's only an American passport for. I mean, so I have no idea. So um, observing the dynamics of these groups and how they live their faith, and when I talk about resilience, I hats off to my brothers and sisters who live resilience in a different way,
Mm,
right? So that's something to learn that I learned as Puerto Rican from my brothers and sisters, and I invite the majority culture friends to also learn about what resilience means.
hmm.
What is resilience? A faith that is resilient, that persevere, that is passed down through generations. I mean, there's something there, and it goes beyond the experience of crossing the border or living here. They don't know the language very well, or maybe they're a second gen. It goes beyond that. There's a level of resilience in every generation that it's so different. So that's something to learn. Let me give you an example. So the first generation, and of course how they work hard, how the resilience in their faith. They probably went to church back in their country 3, 4, 5 a days a week. I mean, it's so many days. And now, and they only meet here on Sundays because we meet on Sundays, right? And sometimes during the week, if there's something, or there's a youth group, right? So how do they maintain their faith, their resilience in a culture that it's involuntarily pulling them away from their
Mm,
religious traditions that invited them continuously to be at church, to do community, right? So that's why you see they meet in small groups. They're so hospitable, right? They have all of these other expressions of faith and community, right? And we may mistake that as a missional strategy. Oh, I mean that's what we should do to attract them, or that's what we should do to be more hospitable, or just pause, wait, immerse yourself, grow in understanding. That's not it. It's the level of resilience that they're building, it's shaping their lives, they're passing to the next
mm,
generation because they are committed to live their faith, to live their relationship with God in community in a different way. How to do that? They need to cope with that. But for
yeah.
second gen will be different. They will negotiating. They're going to be negotiating as second gen and strategizing as adults at work. So that's part of my scholarship. So you read a book, or if you've read the book, you'll see lots of stories of people that some of them are out of work, and they s- they feel the pressure to behave a certain way. I mean, they were talking about people who grew up here in the States, who were born here in the States, who are I mean super proficient in English, professionals, educated, and they still feel like, hey, wait, if I don't behave a certain way, I'm not going to be,
Hmm.
accepted, right? What does that do to their faith?
Mm,
What does that do to their, so there's a different level of resilience when it comes to be a second gen and live as Christian in a professional and as a professional. How do they cope with that, right? And the same thing happening in churches as a second gen. Um, if they are part of a church that is growing in their understanding of what multicultural is, right? They will feel more empowered to um, to grow in their contribution to the mission of God than if they are part of a church that doesn't perhaps represent or acknowledge their
mm.
diversity as it should. So again, those are examples of things that we can learn and things that we can do. Right, that level of resilience and how it expresses itself differently through generations. And I can
Very
give a
helpful.
couple more, but
Yeah, I
uh,
think that that's good, and I mean, a point you mentioned first, that I want to just underscore about not treating people as missional objects. I do think that a lot of people from other cultures will. I've experienced a sense of like really wanting to know you for you,
yeah,
and we have this tendency, and I do think that culturally, cross culturally, it's pronounced, but we can have it in general, regardless of race and culture and origin. We have it, for instance, a church might say about where you live. whether you live in a suburb or a trailer park or an apartment
Mhm.
building or in this part of town or that part of town. We can
Mhm.
start to do your, treating people as a missional object, right? By just those factors, right?
Yeah.
Or by their socioeconomic class, or by the jobs that they have, or the education that they have. These are all things we do to sort of group people together. You add that another layer on top of that you're talking about of ethnicity and country of origin and culture, and we can start to just treat people as a missional object instead of getting to know them for them, and
Mhm.
their uniqueness and who they are. You're a Puerto Rican, but you're not like all other Puerto Ricans. All other Puerto Ricans, there's all kinds. Your wife is very different than you, I've
Right.
noticed.
Right.
And so there's a lot of differences, and enjoying those, and that's true of us too. And so I think that's helpful. Treat people as people, love them as people. Don't treat them as a project. Treat them as a person, right? I think
Yeah.
that's huge. Well, I'm so grateful to have you here and to learn a little bit more from Yamil Acevedo, the Executive Vice President of Wesley Seminary at Indiana Wesleyan University, the author of Faithful Inheritances, which you can find anywhere books are sold. And of course, find more about the seminary at indwest.edu/seminary. And to you, our listeners, and wherever you find your pods, or our viewers over at YouTube who are watching this, thanks for tuning into Not That Kind of Christian. If you like today's episode, share it with a friend. That's the best thing you can do. Text that to them right now, or give it a review, or generally get it out there in the cool ways you know how to do. You know how you do that stuff. And you can check out more info in the show notes. You can find me, as always, at daviddrury.substack.com, where I write twice a week. Big thanks to Seth Strand, our producer, who makes this podcast possible, and to our executive producer, and here I'm going to sound like I'm repeating myself, Yamil Acevedo, who is also our executive producer, and I already gave his bio. He's sitting right there, so this part's awkward. But anyway, thank you for being the executive producer of this and helping us make this pod happen. Thanks, everybody, for listening or watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.